I'm Jason Connolly, CEO of JMC Legal Recruitment and JMC Partners. Welcome to the Career Success Podcast. In this thought-provoking series, we will dig deep to know what it takes to reach the top in your chosen industry. Every week, we conduct interviews and lead the way in conversations, speaking to the biggest names in the world of business. What makes them successful? What actually defines success? What lessons have they learned? Find out how to overcome business obstacles and challenges. In this episode this week, we're speaking to Felix Elliott-Berry, co-founder of Siblings Distillery. The backstory behind Siblings Distillery, it was founded in the summer of 2014 by four Elliott-Berry siblings, who at the time were all aged 22 or younger. Although young, the siblings had spent their teenage years helping out with the family microbrewery in the hometown of Cheltenham. This experience, fueled with their passion for creating drinks, led them to the conclusion that they should work together to create their very own drinks company. After a year of development, they launched Sibling Triple Distilled Gin, which was their first and only product for the first 3 years of trading before moving to a new distillery and launching the seasonal range in 2017. They've won a multitude of awards, had lots of press coverage, and I'm really delighted to be joined by you, Felix. So thank you so much for coming on to this episode this week.
No problem. It's nice to chat to you, Jason.
Thank you. So, really interesting. I guess, first of all, how did you come up with the idea for Sibling Distillery and the gin at such a young age?
So actually, we'd always kind of planned on working together on a project. In our family, working in sort of family businesses and things like that is actually a more kind of conventional career path than sort of traditional education and so on. And my sisters and I were away on holiday with my parents, I guess it was in sort of mid-2013. And as you mentioned, our parents run a microbrewery. It's always been quite a sort of small scale, local, sort of supplying local pubs and things like that. And while we were away, they got an email from a company who contacted them and said, we'd be interested in buying your gone off beer or your leftover beer to turn it into whiskey. And that gave us a real kind of light bulb moment of like, hang on a second, what we've never really thought about, business wise, is stepping outside of the beer side of the industry and going into distilling. And actually the raw materials are similar, the processes are similar. And since I was 12 years old, I'd been helping out my dad making beer. So we thought, actually, that might not be a completely ridiculous idea. And on top of that, the only thing that we'd kind of worked on together before as siblings was we made some sloe gin and sold it on a farmer's market stand that our parents had at Christmas time. And we made some sloe gin, we sold it for just one morning and sold out. And we thought, well, this is an easy industry to be in.
Sounds like slight naivety at the start, perhaps.
The naivety was honestly spellbinding. We built a whole business based on naivety, really. A lot of the decisions that we made later on down the line, we definitely wouldn't have done had we known how difficult it was going to make life for ourselves. But it did give us that kind of that boost to go on without worrying too much about whether it was a kind of ridiculous idea or not. So we got this email, we thought about it, and we thought, yeah, why not? We got nothing to lose. Now's a good time to really throw ourselves into something that could be a bit of fun or could turn out to be a business.
It's a great story. I think even when I started my business, I think I knew it was going to be hard, but I think there was a high level of naivety on my part as well. It sounds like your parents starting the microbrewery, but was that quite a driving factor and inspiration to your success, or was that kind of a home craft beer company which kind of led the way? What was that? Would you say that was a driving factor?
So we, again, naively thought that we'd make the most of our parents' customer list and things like that. And thought that actually, all we've got to do is create a product and we'll be able to sort of piggyback off a few of the pubs that they supply and so on. But what we really quickly realised was that our market was almost 100% different to our parents' kind of local microbrewery market. And actually, that because the four of us were involved, to even start to make it pay and make it sustainable for the four of us, we had to turn over about 6 times the amount that they were turning over as well, just because of the way the business was set up. So actually, within a few weeks, it became blatantly obvious that the crossover that we'd been expecting to be there just purely wasn't. So we had to really kind of find our own feet and really make it on our own. So we did kind of hope that was the case, but we found out very quickly that it really wasn't hugely helpful.
Because you left school after sixth form. Because myself, I never went to even done A levels or went to university. I went through a career of being in the police for years, and I think I went to the University of Life. But it looks like you kind of had these plans to go to university, but it was kind of deferred by a job.
Yeah, so I had planned to go to university, and then whilst in sixth form, I worked in a pub and got very friendly with the man who went on to be my boss in my first job. And shortly before I got my exam results to find out whether I'd got into my university of choice, he said, well, you know, if you decide you'd rather, I'd happily give you an internship at my business, which was a creative brand agency. And to be honest, that sounded pretty appealing to me. I've been someone who's worked since I was 12 years old. So really, I wasn't afraid of getting stuck into something that I didn't really know anything about. And at the time, I knew nothing about branding and advertising apart from the series Mad Men, which I'd watched and quite enjoyed. I thought, well, why not? We'll give it a go, and I'll defer my university for a year. It'll still be there when I come out. And sort of midway through that year, my boss sat down with me and said, look, what would you like to achieve here? And I said, well, if I decide not to go to university, I want to guarantee that I'm in a better position after 3 years than I would have been if I went there. And he said, okay, well, I can help you make that happen. And so I kind of gradually went off the idea of going to university, because a lot of what I was doing in my job was what I was going to go and study, and I was getting paid for it. So yeah, it wasn't that I, was against the idea of university, but as it happens, neither of my younger sisters or my younger brother have gone to university either. So we've all kind of followed a similar sort of path, got a bit of experience, and then threw ourselves sort of wholeheartedly into the distillery project.
That's interesting, because you spent time as well at a creative brand agency. Did that give you kind of a basis for how to get, this product off the ground?
Yeah, definitely. And actually looking back, more so than I appreciated at the time as well, because when we meet other people in the industry or other people at similar stages in their business, I'm quite often staggered by the lack of thought people have given to brand guidelines and brand stories and things like that. We started very much with that kind of at the forefront of our mind, as well as the kind of manufacturing side of it. So definitely having that bit of kind of background of understanding managing brand projects and so on really kind of give us a bit of a head start when it came to designing our brand and logo and website and things like that. We wanted everything kind of tied together from the outset. So when we approached some of the more kind of marquee stores in the first few weeks that we were launched, places like Harvey Nichols and Fortnum and Mason, kind of market ready. It didn't look like a homemade project, even though it was done on a tiny scale. It had that kind of feel of a brand that was a little bit bigger.
But that was obviously, it sounds to me like quite a deliberate move. You had a very clear focus on where you wanted this product to be and a target market, which I guess is very important.
It absolutely was, but what we had was an ideal target market, and then what we found was that actually where we made our revenue wasn't necessarily from that ideal target market. So we approached the places like your sort of big department stores and high-end off licenses and so on. And that was great. We got listings in there, but found out we were not doing anything like the sort of numbers that we needed to through those shops. So we actually took it back really to the beginning and went back to the farmers markets and started selling every weekend at markets. And whilst doing that, approached shops in the towns that the farmers markets were in and sort of said to them, look, we've just sold 100 bottles this weekend in your village. That's almost one per every 100 people that live here. We've told them all that you're going to stock it, and so we're hoping that next week you'll have it in, so when they come to replenish it, we can direct them to you. And we kind of went through it that way.
I guess it's really interesting how you kind of went to the supermarkets, and the high-end retailers, which you would assume is the natural kind of place to take the product, but you actually kind of went back to where you started, rolled up your sleeves, got your hands dirty. And that sounds like a really kind of different and refreshing way to kind of do things. What drove that?
So yeah, it was, we thought it was very important initially to get some kind of marquee customers. So we got customers like Whole Foods, Harvey Nichols, Fortnum and Mason, those kind of bigger department stores and kind of flashy industry names. And we thought that that was the correct thing to do because we thought they're going to drive more volume than these kind of smaller independents. But what we realized really quickly was that those bigger shops demand bigger margins. They want more commitment from you. They want you to be doing tastings and sort of bending over backwards to keep your shelf space there. And actually what we needed was kind of quick cash flow and quick turnover so that we, having quit our jobs, could actually afford to live. Because that is, obviously when you start a business, you want to build a brand, but you also do need to be able to put food on the table. So
it's one of the number one reasons why businesses go under. It's getting cash through the door quick enough, isn't it?
Absolutely, and cash flow in the early days is hugely important because your bigger customers want longer credit terms and so on, and with no reserves, you can't really afford to support that. So we had to go back to things that were making instant cash, but we also needed to be growing our trade customer base. So the best way to do that, we found, was actually rock up every week at different farmers markets around the country, so around the south of England mainly, and we were selling quite a lot of gin because we could do direct to customer selling, and that's something which all of us are reasonably competent at. So we would sell 100 bottles on a Saturday or something, and then we would approach whatever was the local independent off license or the local independent farm shop there and say to them, look, we've just got you 100 new customers, they all live in this village. Now would be a good time to list our gin because probably by next weekend they're going to want another bottle and we need to tell them where they can get it. So that was really how we went about building our customer base to start with, because A, we were making money on that weekend, but B, we were then securing an outlet in all these different parts of the country that we wouldn't necessarily.
Really interesting way to do it. It's it makes total sense, and
it was through necessity, really. Because we didn't have a marketing budget where we could pay 40k and put a print ad in GQ or whatever. It was really, we had to make our marketing make money as well.
How long was it that you were kind of I'm assuming that you're no longer going to these farmers markets now necessarily.
Oh no, that we still go. I mean, not as frequently, and maybe not us in person all the time, but they still make money, and so we'd be mad to stop doing them. The only reason we stop doing them now is in areas where we have a lot of retailers, because then we're treading on their toes. So some of the places historically we would have done Cheltenham, which is our hometown, Cheltenham's farmers market, but we actually stopped because there's just so many retailers within the town centre who carry our lines that it's not really fair on them to rock up on their doorstep and do it. But if there's an area where we don't really have a lot of outlets, we'll certainly still do it.
It's even looking at the design of the bottle, it's really unique and luxurious, and I think just the branding of it is really clever, because you've got several unique selling points about this product. I love gin myself, but I can't say I know too much about the kind of process of making it. But you're one of the only distilleries in the UK that makes the gin entirely from scratch, which I would just have assumed every distillery did that.
Well, we'll go back to your naivety point at the start.
Yeah,
we naively assumed the same, and that if you were going to make a gin, what you would do is start with raw materials and make yourself a gin. We had no idea when we first started out with this that actually the majority of the market work from a few suppliers who make base gins or base alcohols and then add their signature flavour or even just brand it themselves. So we had no idea when we started that what we were doing was really putting us in just a handful of places in the UK that actually make spirits from start to finish. But it's actually paid dividends in the end. And we've questioned whether it was the right thing to do almost every day since we started, because it is a lot more work. But it does mean that nowadays we do a lot of kind of developing recipes for other companies and contract making of gin and so on. So even outside of our own brand stuff, it's allowed us to kind of grow our business, making other people's gin for them, and also just gives us a much better experience on distillery tours when people come and visit us and things. They can see how the process works completely from start to finish.
I guess it was a bold move because it must have put your startup costs much higher, but I guess, and even the price of the product going to market, if you've got just a couple of suppliers out there who wholesale gin in itself.
Let me tell you a little bit about how we managed to afford our startup, because it's actually quite funny.
Right.
Starting a distillery, if you do it the conventional way, is an extremely costly process. Buying an off-the-shelf still, just like a sort of one of similar size to ours, if you bought it from one of the manufacturers in Germany or Italy or somewhere like that, it's going to cost you in the region of £250,000 before you've found a premises and before you've found people to operate it, that you're already $250,000 in the hole. And obviously, being a few kids who had, moderate jobs or moderate to poor jobs, and no real kind of savings to speak of, and also, as you can imagine, not having banks falling over themselves to invest, we had to find a way to do this on a slightly more shoestring budget. So we found a designer of stills in Australia who was working at the time on a design that hadn't quite made it to market yet. It was made of glass and stainless steel with only parts of it made of copper, as opposed to the normal kind of full copper still. And it was made in different parts that you could reconfigure and move around and so on. It was basically a slightly groundbreaking bit of kit that hadn't really been tested on a commercial size. And we convinced him to build it for us just for the cost of the materials. And we would basically trial it for him and report back to him on whether it worked or not, so that he could have a case study of which to take it to investors and to market it. So covering the cost of some glass and stainless steel obviously was much more affordable than buying an off-the-shelf distillery. And it just so happens that the design is actually very good. And now there's thousands of them around the world. But we had the very first one that ever went into production on a commercial scale. So that again, cut our startup costs down by, down to about 10% of what they would have been otherwise.
Did you have any staff in the beginning then, or was it literally just yourself and the siblings who started it up?
For 2 years, it was just myself and my siblings.
Wow.
At the very start, we were living off 40 quid a week each for about 18 months, whilst we pumped everything back into the business to keep affording trade shows and keep affording markets.
An endless supply of gin.
Yeah, well,
right, okay.
that made life a bit easier.
Right, okay. Well, what's it like working with your siblings? Because I can't imagine what's the dynamic like.
You'd be amazed how easy it is to get on when you're extremely busy.
Yeah.
We just found that the only times we've ever kind of got under each other's skin a little bit is when things are quiet. So we're normally extremely busy, and we very much don't tread on each other's toes in the areas that we work in. So I work mainly in branding, sales, and kind of production management. My youngest sister runs all of our events, which is quite a big side of our business now. My other sister is our finance director. My younger brother is our sort of production manager. So we definitely kind of try and stay out of each other's way when it comes to our day jobs. And then we try and make it fun when we have to do stuff together. I would say what it does is cut out the amount of sort of waffle in meetings, which is handy. It means we can get things done a little quicker, and it does probably make our decision making a little more rapid, because we don't have to go through kind of layers of management and things like that.
And there's no corporate red tape or anything like that, which sometimes gets in the way of people making decisions. I work with some of my members of family, and I can relate to what you're saying there. But I think you know each other and you all trust each other, which, in business is to know that you've got someone in that position, but you actually implicitly trust.
Exactly, and it was definitely a learning curve, because you go from spending your whole teenage years winding each other up to trying your best not to wind each other up when you're working together. Yeah. It wasn't a long transition period before we were working really well together. Actually, all it really took was us taking some office space instead of working from home. We were all sort of, to start with, working around our mum's kitchen table, but as soon as we took some office space and made it a little more professional, it all clicked into place pretty well.
Do your parents still do the craft beer, or has that now been part of
They do, but actually, as of, just into the lockdown this year, our business, so Siblings Distillery, acquired their share in it. So we actually now sort of run their part of the business. We saw an opportunity in the craft beer market, and so we bought a new brewery, and then installed all of that on the same site as our distillery, and have just relaunched it as a slightly more kind of lager and craft beer brewery, as opposed to a more traditional real ale brewery.
Okay.
But we sort of own the share now.
Right, okay. Because in year 3, you had a successful crowdfunding campaign to renovate the building that you were based in. Yes. Crowdfunding, it's been around for a while, but it's still a relatively new concept. What made you decide to go down that route?
So this in the start of year 3, we moved into a much bigger premises than we'd been in, and that's not saying much because our initial premises was shoebox size. But we took a bigger premises, but it was extremely run down. And we wanted to start doing events there. We wanted to make more of a visitor centre sort of thing, kind of get some people in for tours and so on. So the way that we did our crowdfunding is we didn't have enough cash reserves to really put the amount of money into it that we wanted to. The way that we did it was we actually sold corporate events to people. So instead of selling equity or anything like that, we just did discounted corporate events, but sold in advance. So basically, you could pay £500 or £1,000 for a business team day or for a business Christmas party or something like that. But we just sold it ahead of time, so they got a discounted rate on it, and that helped us raise about 30 grand just to do the place up a little bit when we moved into there.
Because for anyone that doesn't know, crowdfunding is basically a concept where you're giving something, it may be a product or an experience, and it's not like they get a share in the company, and it's a way to raise capital.
We never really wanted to take external investment because obviously for a relatively small business at the time, there was already a few shareholders involved. So anyone coming in was going to probably end up being the majority shareholder, which is not something that we wanted at the time. So this just seemed like a sensible way to raise some capital that we needed kind of in the short term, just to make that place what we needed it to be. And we've actually moved on since then to a new building, which we've got a long-term lease on, which is a converted barn on a Cotswold farm, which is great fun.
Because recently, as well, what I think was really interesting that I read was you've actually gone into, since the COVID lockdown, the hand sanitizer business, which seems like a good market to be in current times. But it also sounds like, how did that all kind of come about? Was it something that the crisis hit and you just kind of pounced on the opportunity?
It was something that a week before we were doing it, we'd never thought of before.
Right, okay.
When I said earlier about how you can make decisions pretty quickly when all of the management team are family members, this was one of those occasions where we could make a decision within a few hours that it was, first of all, the right thing to do. So it was, we got approached first of all when things were starting to look serious with the whole pandemic thing. The Met Police and Gloucestershire Police Force basically got in contact with us and were like, look, we can't get sanitizer from anywhere and we need quite large volumes of it. Is there any chance that you know anybody who is in the industry that you buy alcohol from or so on? And within an hour we were like, well, why don't we just do it? So we went back to them and said, okay, cool, we can make that for you in the short term until you found a proper supplier. And obviously being one of the few places in the country that actually manufactures alcohol, the nationwide ethanol shortage that kind of ensued when everyone went mad for hand sanitizer and surface cleaners didn't really affect us. So we were able to pivot pretty quickly, get on board with that. We made some fairly kind of rushed stuff for the police forces just so they could get back out on the beat. And then we put in some proper development time to making some more kind of high-end, nice sanitizer, which we now sell to kind of Michelin star and Rosette standard restaurants around the country. So we kind of moved quite quickly from doing the bulk stuff, which we did for about a month, into now kind of more in line with our gin stuff, the kind of high-end, nice smelling sanitizer for your sort of high-end restaurants and hotels.
So kind of moving on then to your success habits. I believe business and personal are really kind of closely intertwined, and what you do in your personal life does in some way tie into business. What are your kind of success habits, Felix? Do you have things that you think are quite keep you kind of on track, keep you focused, keep you moving forward?
So one of the best lessons that I learned from the boss that I had in my first job was that if you're going to start a business, you really have to kind of forget the idea of a work-life balance, and you have to just roll it all into one and see your business and your work as just part of your life, and you don't kind of separate the two as one being good and one being evil, if that makes sense. So a lot of people have quite an unhealthy idea of a work-life balance where work is the bad part of their life and the rest of it is the good part. So first of all, I kind of try my best to not separate that out too much, but then also there has to be some sort of quality of personal life as well that doesn't involve just work. So one thing that I've actually found really useful recently has been the kind of enforced kind of step back that the lockdown made everybody take. And really kind of look at whether I'm spending too much time doing purely work stuff and whether I could maybe combine that with some of the things I enjoy as well a little more. There was a time, when we first started where I think year 2 or year 3, I counted that I'd had only 11 days in the year where I hadn't been working sort of the whole day. And I thought that's probably not giving me enough time to have a bit of variety. So, just kind of, first of all, not seeing work as completely separate from enjoyment, but also just finding enough time to kind of not be completely obsessed with just your whole life being a profit and loss sheet, and actually just enjoying some things that are completely mundane and completely separate from that.
Right, it's really interesting. I think that's a really good way of looking at things. In terms of, obviously you've had challenges along the way. Do you have a kind of a strategy for when you get a challenge? How do you overcome those?
I think it depends on the challenge, because there are some things that you can just kind of bulldoze your way through and make work. And there are some things that really do make you kind of step back and actually look at whether what you're doing is right or not, and whether there's a different way to do things. So, take, for example, a challenge that we had in the early days was one of our competitors reported to Advertising Standards Authority that we were using underage models on our website. Now, what they were referring to was that we had an About Us page on there, and that the picture of myself and my siblings at the time, we were all under 25, and there's a law that says you're not allowed to use models who are under 25 in alcohol advertising. So basically, they came down on us and said that we needed to remove any trace of anything about the founders of our business from all of our social media, all of our website, all of our print marketing. So
that is the brand, though.
So that did kind of give us a bit of a challenge, and we had, for the first year of trading, kind of built up this idea that we were a major part of the brand and so on. So that kind of just forced us to think of it differently, and we had to kind of go much more down the route of promoting our methodology and promoting the fact that we make everything from scratch and so on. And actually, in the end, that turned out to be a really valuable part of our kind of time development, because it made us really realize that was quite an important part of what we do, and maybe, let's put the product first for a while.
But maybe the backstory isn't enough. Maybe it's more.
Yeah, exactly.
Really focus on the product.
Maybe we've been relying on that a little too much, and we needed to really focus on developing new products and really bringing new things out more frequently, and upping our production, and maybe doing more where we invite people in to meet us in person, because that was the one time where we were allowed to use ourselves to promote it. Some things you can kind of use to sort of pivot around, and then some things are just a challenge that you really need to kind of bite down on your gum shield, put your head down and go through it. And those are things like increased competition, or having a competitor that's trying to sort of push you out of a market. And these are things that really, I think sometimes you just graft your way through. You kind of sit down together and go, right, are we ready to sort of battle this one? Yeah, we are. Okay, let's just get on with it, and realize that the next 6 months are going to be tricky, but we're going to find a way through. And as long as we manage our finances sensibly, and as long as we keep determined, we'll sort of get there in the end. And I do think that there is a time and a place for that as well.
It seems like you've got a really sensible outlook when it comes to challenges, and that must have been highly difficult, but it sounds, in a way, maybe they've done you a favour. It made you go back to and actually look at what are the other USPs of the products.
Absolutely. And I think all these challenges, you learn something from them. And when you're young and in business like we were, learning is the most important part, really, because we're well aware that we came into this kind of with a distinct lack of experience. So we're bound to learn a lot of lessons, and we just got to make sure that you're kind of present enough to understand at the time that you're learning a lesson, and not to kind of get in a why always me sort of mentality. I've
been through the same journey starting a business. I think I might make a mistake, but I learn pretty quickly, and I don't make the same mistake twice. And I think that's what it comes down to. When you start a business, you do have to go through that process.
When it's personally costing you money, you learn very quickly.
I couldn't agree more, Felix. So what's next for for Siblings Distillery? What's the road ahead in the next few years looking like for you?
With our brand, with Sibling, more of the same really. We're just gradually chipping away at building our market. We've got some good export opportunities coming up, and so that'll be a growth area for us. We're doing more kind of targeted work in the on-trade, which is great fun. But actually, one of the things that I'm most excited about is we've just launched a new brand in partnership with a major wine brand. And that'll be fun because they're going to start at the completely opposite end of the spectrum to how we started Sibling. They already have the routes to supermarkets. They already have the routes to export. They already have the budget to brand it and market it well. So we've developed the recipe for them. We're making it all for them, have the contract to make it all, and we'll be sort of partly representing them on it.
That's really interesting. It's going from back to front.
Exactly. It's a really exciting opportunity for us to see it done in a completely different way to the way that we've done it and be part of that journey as well. So that's a lot of fun. And then obviously, having just acquired the brewery as well, we'll be moving into the craft beer space under a slightly modified version of our parents' branding. And that'll be a really interesting learning curve for us too. So the theme here is a lot of learning and a lot of watching, how things are done by other people and seeing whether there's ways we can tweak what we do with Sibling, which is kind of what we've been doing for the last 6 years.
Right. Do you know what, Felix? I had so many questions down here and so much background. The time has just completely ran away with us. What if you had to give one piece of advice to someone who's perhaps listening to this episode, who's just starting out in business or has an idea or a product that wants to go to market? What advice would you give them?
Make sure that what you're focusing on at the start are the things that are actually important. So we wasted a lot of time focusing on things like launch parties and things like high-end customers and sponsoring cocktail bars in London and sponsoring boat parties and things, and it was all just dead money. And really what was making us money at the time was farmers markets and independent farm shops and independent off licenses. And although that was the less glamorous part of what we were doing, that was actually what was making us money. And had we realized that sooner, we would probably have had a more profitable business quicker, and we wouldn't have been living on £40 a week. So
I think that's a really good listen as well, because I think in the world of what we live in now with social media, influencers, people on Twitter, people with followers, Instagram and all this, I think you can get a lot of big businesses in those early days could get so kind of caught up and consumed in the social media bubble. When it actually comes down to it, it's pounds, pence and shillings that matters.
Absolutely, and it's very easy to get blinded by the lights, and there's a lot of opportunities that will come along that sound great, but just make sure you keep your feet on the ground a little bit and do the things that are bringing in the cash flow and making sure you can pay your suppliers, because it's all well and good sponsoring bars on the River Thames, but when you can't afford the cases to send your bottles out in from your supplier, you don't have a business anymore. So that is, for us, that was a lesson that we learned very quickly and realized that actually you really need to build it up from the ground and don't sort of run before you can walk on that sort of thing.
So I think drawing back another listen there is watch cash flow. Make sure that you've got cash coming in before you go out spending money on somewhat fancy marketing events.
Even if you're doing it in an unglamorous way, cash flow really is king. It's very easy to spend a lot of money that doesn't bring you any quick returns. And in the early days, what you need are quick returns.
Great. Felix, it's been so nice talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Anyone interested in Felix and Sibling Distillery, where can they find the product, Felix?
The easiest place, first of all, is just siblingdistillery.com. So we have our full range on there. And then the easiest thing to do if you want to find a physical retailer is drop us an email at info@siblingdistillery.com. Just give us your postcode and we'll point you to your nearest physical retailer if you'd like to go and see it in person.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Felix. And that is all for this week on the Career Success Podcast. Join us again for another episode where we'll be talking to another business leader.